Good evening. Welcome to MUFON Los Angeles. My name is Steve Murillo. I am the State Section Director for MUFON LA. We've got a great presentation tonight. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Chris OBrien. And Chris makes his home in Sedona, Arizona, but he has had experiences his entire life. He's written several books. The Mysterious Valley is one, highly recommend it, and Enter the Valley is another one.
Am I turned on here? Yeah, you're cool. Okay.
Author and paranormal researcher Chris OBrien was drawn to the sacred valley of Native American myth. He was soon compelled to document in disturbing detail the inexplicable events unfolding around him and the questions they raised. What is the truth behind the nightly light shows of UFOs pulsing and glowing across the Rocky Mountain sky? What is the truth behind rumors of underground bases and secret government activity, and why does the military regularly fly there? What is the truth behind ancient myths and legends of the Indians and the mysterious crystal skull found in the Mysterious Valley? And who is responsible for the scores of cattle left bloodless and mutilated in high, strange fashion? And why did the first publicized case of this occur there in the San Luis Valley? In his presentation to MUFON LA, Chris OBrien reveals fascinating and sometimes frightening evidence and first-hand accounts by residents of the area about one of the most bizarre regions of the Earth. From a fever pitch of UFO activity to rumors of underground bases, OBrien discusses both the history of this region, steeped in ancient Native American traditions, and what his high strangeness might indicate for the country as a whole. If you guys would please welcome, put your hands together, Chris OBrien.
All right. Hey, it's good to be back. It's been, 8 years, I think, since I was last here. And since then, a lot of things have happened. What I'm going to try to do tonight, first of all, I want to, before I continue, is I want to thank Sandra and Steve and LA MUFON for having me here. And this is my third talk in a whirlwind little mini tour here in California. And the first night I was able to get it done in under 4 hours. Last night I was able to do it in about 3 hours, 20 minutes. Hopefully tonight I'll be able to cover all the material in a little less time. I'm going to be trying to cover tonight just an amazing amount of activity that I have personally investigated. And obviously there's been activity going on in the area of south central Colorado that I'm going to be talking about tonight, the San Luis Valley. There's been a lot of stuff that have been documented over the years, and I stand on the shoulders of some mighty large giants who have been there before me. And as I go through the presentation, I will give you examples of some of the research that has been done prior to my arriving there. And I'm going to be covering a lot of ground tonight, so I'm going to ask you to hold your questions until later. That was part of the reason why it took 4 hours the first night. So I'm going to get right to it here. First of all, let me see. There we go. I'm going to try to define for you what I believe to be a perfect definition of what a hotspot region is, or an area, some people would call it a portal area. And usually these areas have Native American traditions and myths attached to them, so obviously we're going to cover briefly some of those traditions. And as a result of Native American ancient traditions, the modern culture has, in the San Luis Valley, because it's so remote, has come up with its own unique take on some of these wonderful mysteries that we're going to be discussing. And I'm going to go into what exactly some of the portal area phenomena are that we documented there scientifically and through anecdotal reports and law enforcement reports. We're going to give a quick historical overview of the European influence and incursion into the south central Colorado, north central New Mexico region. And again, I'm going to be covering, as hopefully get some of the various theories out and try to give you an idea of what some of the other researchers think is going on there. Oh, thank you. Also, the animal death phenomenon, unfortunately, the unusual animal death phenomenon has reared its ugly head in the San Luis Valley for quite a number of years. My last talk here 8 years ago, I think I dove into that subject matter exclusively. I'm going to briefly give you some ideas of some of the theories that over the years I've postulated, which runs contrary to, in many ways, to some other researchers such as Linda Howe and Peter Jordan and others. And hopefully with the cameras rolling, I won't get into too much trouble on that. Obviously, because this is a very, an area rich in phenomenal occurrences, your tax dollars is also very interested in what's going on there. And I am going to stick my neck out a little bit and talk about what I have uncovered and others have uncovered, including law enforcement, in terms of the government's involvement in many of these mysteries. Obviously, this is MUFON, so at some point we got to talk about UFOs. I've got some pretty interesting visual documentation, and I will show you some examples of some of the reports that we've had visually. And if we have time, I'm going to dive into some of my own conclusions that I've arrived at over a 12-year period of investigating unusual phenomena there. Okay, let's move right into it. First of all, I think we can all agree that there are some areas all over the world, really, but in North America there are some very special areas that tend to be hardest hit and have more of a variety and intensity of unusual phenomena than other areas. And here's a list of them. Let me get my handy little pointer here. The San Luis Valley, I believe, is probably America's most anomalous region. I know everybody who investigates as a regional investigator thinks that their area is the best or the hardest hit, but if you go online and look at the Computer UFO Network listing of hotspot regions, 5 of the top 10 regions in the United States in terms of per capita sightings are in the San Luis Valley, including the #1 county, which is Saguache. And I think it's pretty interesting that they should come up with all that data, because I can back it up with this sighting log right here. And I know I'm very honored. I just met Ann Druffel here tonight, and I know she has done similar work here in California, documenting regional levels of activity, and I can't wait to talk to her a little bit too later on. Anyway, other areas are, for instance, my current home in Sedona, Arizona, the Mogollon Rim area, and actually from the area now north of Phoenix has been having quite a interesting potential sighting wave. I do believe some of these sightings you're seeing online are hoaxes, and there's some guys down there getting really good with their with their digital video effects and other things. I don't want to point fingers or name names, but the area around Sedona has a rich history of phenomenal events. Tom Dongo, I believe, was here and spoke, and if you were here, you heard about some of those. Here in California, obviously the Death Valley area in the Mojave Desert, just, for decades has had a very interesting tradition of phenomenal events. The Ohio River Valley, John Keel's book, Mothman Prophecies, covered one wave that happened in that area, is another special area. Portions of the Black Hills around the Lakota and Dakota reservation areas. The Mount Shasta area and Mount Adams, some of the power spots in the Cascade area here on the Pacific Coast. And how many here have heard of the Sherman Ranch case in Utah? That's probably, it gets my vote as the strangest single case featuring UFO type activity and the types of things I'm going to be discussing tonight. I was, I'm not sure if I can say fortunate, but I was probably the first nationally recognized investigator on the ground there at Terry Sherman's ranch, and I could give you a whole 2-hour lecture just on that single case. That's the only case that I investigated actively outside of the San Luis Valley because it was so compelling. And generally, I think we can say that anywhere you have a Native American reservation, the larger ones, you're going to find that those areas tend to be focus areas for unusual activity. Moving right along. Hello? There we go. Oop, okay. I'll get the hang of this here. It's, technology. Sometimes I'm all thumbs. What is a hotspot region? Well, Lou Turre wrote a very interesting book years ago, and he listed out these bullet points, which you can read there. Generally, these areas have ancient indigenous sacred sites, such as I just mentioned. They have unusual geophysical properties, too. Waves of anomalous activity tend to be constantly reported there, the ebb and flow, but generally, if there's going to be a series of sightings, it tends to be more intense in these areas where the veil possibly is thin. There's also that culture, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, there's a culture of explanations that rises up in the community trying to explain these events, and the ubiquitous tax dollar presence of your government. They tend to either have a presence or are trying to expand their presence to encompass more of these portal areas, and I will talk about that a lot more. Come on, there we go. Just to give you guys a quick geographic idea for those of you not familiar with the area. This is the border of Colorado and New Mexico. The San Luis Valley officially goes down to the border in this upper northern part, which is mostly inhabited by Anglos. It goes down to here, and then this lower portion down to Taos in northern New Mexico is not really officially the San Luis Valley, but geographically, this is what I've delineated out as my petri dish to investigate. And I've tried to keep blinders on over the years and only address this particular area here and really try to focus in on what I would consider to be a microcosm of experience. My rationale for that basically is that if I can figure out what is going on here, any aspect of what is going on here, as above so below, it should overlay onto the macrocosm. And I'm going to show you some slides here that's going to give you a quick idea of why I think this area is special and some of the things that I've come up with that are sort of bolster that idea. First of all, what you're looking at here is an aeromagnetic map. It's a composite map over a 10-year period of the Earth's magnetic field in the state of Colorado. The next slide will show you the state of New Mexico. What you're seeing here basically is a colorized representation of field strength. The redder the color into purple is maximum intensity of field strength in the Earth's magnetic field. Going down into blue is minimum intensity. And the first thing that I noticed when I got my aeromagnetic maps was that the areas that tend to have most sightings, I've kind of outlined them here. This is the San Luis Valley down here, the northern portion of it. And if you look carefully, you can see where I've outlined in Photoshop these areas that are circles in black here. You see these here areas? Well, what is unusual about this is these areas tend to be the seams where minimum and maximum magnetic field strength are in close proximity to one another. And I really haven't seen anybody talk about this in all the research that I've done into the actual geophysical properties of a potential hotspot area. Very early on, I noticed that wherever these maximum intensity areas of magnetic strength were in close proximity with minimum areas, there's like a seam, and that tends to be where we have most of our sightings. Now, is this important? I think so. Okay. This is the map of New Mexico. Again, this would be the lower portion of the geographic valley. And you'll notice where this is Taos, around the Taos area. This is around Cuesta here, and Ute Mountain. The Rio Grande Gorge comes right down here. And again, you have that interesting, it's like looking at a topographical map, and when you get to a real serious elevation rise or drop, you know how the lines tend to get real close together. If you equate that sort of idea to this particular mapping of the Earth's magnetic field, you get the same idea. Basically, where there's cliffs on a topo map, where there's cliffs, in these magnetic areas, that's where our sightings are. So I'm going to move quickly on here. This is a more stylized view of the valley, just to give you an idea of why I consider this to be a perfect petri dish of experience and of investigation. The San Luis Valley is about 165, 170 miles long. At its widest point, it's about 70 miles wide. It's completely ringed with mountains. It is radar invisible below 18,000 feet. There are only a few ways to get into the valley. This is Wolf Creek Pass, this is La Vida Pass, Poncha Pass, and then the Rio Grande Gorge that goes down and empties out the south end of the valley down towards Santa Fe, and then of course down into the Gulf of Mexico. Some of the areas that really figure prominently in my investigative work are the Greeny Mountain area on the western side. This is where the NORAD event occurred. How many people here read my books? Okay, good. So, well, some of you haven't. I really do suggest that if you are intrigued enough by what I'm going to be talking about tonight, that you do read my books, because I'm licking the tip of the iceberg here. So this sighting log, I think, is a good testament to that. Anyway, this is Taos, New Mexico down here. This is Blanca Peak here. This area figures very prominently in my talk here and in my investigative work. The Great Sand Dunes area is another very intriguing, anomalous area. They don't know how it got there. It's the world's highest sand dune desert. It's 49 square miles of sand. It's almost a pure pile of quartz, powdered quartz. It goes to the height of over 700 feet. And the scientists, when they drilled down to try to find out how old it was, they hit an ancient forest, so they were able to date it. It's only 11,000 years old. Now, their official explanation of how that sand dune field got there is that prevailing westerly winds piled up the sand in a crook in the mountain chain. And yeah, in 11,000 years. I was a geology minor in school. Sorry, it doesn't work. After I got to know the geologists and the rangers and the park officials out there, they agreed, and they kind of said, well, Chris, yeah, you're right, that is kind of strange, and it's probably not how it really got there, but we got to tell people something, you know. So anyway, just a quick tour. We're going to start on the eastern side of the San Luis Valley, and I'll give you a quick visual tour real quick. This is the central portion of the Sangres. The Sangre de Cristo Mountains are the longest continuously running mountain range in North America. There's 7 peaks above 14,000 feet, and they are quite remote. This would be an aerial shot from about 30,000 feet. This is the eastern side of the Sangres here. Salida would be up here. The town I lived in, Crestone, is right here. This area here is the La Vida Military Operations Area. This whole area over here. And if you look carefully right down here, you see these 2 little mountains? Well, we'll get to those later. Here's the Great Sand Dunes. This is a wonderful shot from the official Department of Interior website. These dunes here are 700 feet high. And again, notice that the color is totally different from everything around them. I had a scientist friend of mine suggest to me, all excited, he said, well, Chris, you say the Indians refer to ant people that live under the dune field there. Well, these mountains, Chris, are filled with quartz, so there must be lots of negative spaces. I figured out how these sand dunes got there. It's the aliens. They're underground, making room in these caverns, powdering up the quartz and kicking it out the back door. Hey, sounds better than prevailing westerly winds. So anyway, I'm going to get to this in a second here to explain. Now, if you're in Alamosa, which is in the geographic center of the valley, and you're headed east towards La Vida Pass, this is Highway 160. This is the view that you have. These are 4 14,000-foot peaks here. The valley floor itself sits at 7,500 feet. It's the world's largest alpine valley. Okay, this is the Rio Grande Gorge as it runs from the border about here down into New Mexico, and this is a very enigmatic place, I must say, and later on I'm going to be giving you examples of why I say that. But when I found this picture online, I noticed that this object was hanging up here in the sky, and I did some Photoshop on it and kind of looked at it closely, and I don't know, maybe it's just an artifact, but the oldest continuously inhabited dwellings in North America are at the Taos Pueblo. And although the Acoma Pueblo and the Isleta Pueblo all claim that they're older, you're looking at probably the longest lived-in buildings in North America. And it's funny, this is about as far north as the Spanish got until the 1777 expedition up into the valley. And I'll cover some of the Spanish information here in a second. This is a very interesting place that I just have been researching and investigating this past spring. A friend of mine who's a bass player in a band, and I've known her for years, is a 4th-generation rancher. And she lives down at the bottom of the Rock Creek Canyon area, which is over by Greeny Mountain that I pointed out in the stylized view of the valley. And she sits right here
once a week, twice a week during the warmer months, and kind of watches her cows as they're grazing around up here. And recently she was up there and she closed her eyes and did her 20-minute meditation or half-hour meditation. And when she awoke, she was a quarter mile up the creek. Go figure. Now, anybody here heard of psilocybin mushrooms? You don't want to do them here. This is a very spooky place. You see the guy down here, he's looking at it going, boy, that sure looks like cubensis to me. This is just an example of some of the wonderful geology that we have there, and this area is rife with reports. This is in the western part of the valley over into the San Juan Mountains. Okay, we're going to go into some real quickly. I'm really buzzing through this material because we don't have enough time to cover it all, so pardon me if I talk too fast and move too quick. This is the Four Corners region of the Southwest. This is obviously Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, and Utah. Now, the Native Americans in the Southwest have a tradition of the Four Cardinal Mountains, or the Four Sacred Mountains. The most important of these is in the San Luis Valley, and it's at Blanca Peak area here. And this is called, in the Diné or Navajo tradition, Cisnagini, which is the place where all thought originates. And it's taken me a lot of years as a white boy that used to wear a black cowboy hat to get the Native Americans to open up and start to tell me some of their more secret knowledge. And one thing that I have corroborated by means of talking and getting the information from 3 sources, is that the Native Americans believe in the Blanca area that there are some sort of doorways or portals that open up, and that's where the cloud people, the cloud dancers, the flying seed pods are seen coming and going. Now, this is an ancient tradition. Again, I'm a nosy white boy. It's very difficult to get a lot of information from Native Americans, but man, I'm persistent, and I've been making friends and influencing folks, hopefully, and they have opened up and told me a few things, and I'm going to share them with you. Now, the sacred mountain of the south is Mount Taylor. This would be about Albuquerque here on the Rio Grande. This is the San Diaz. The San Francisco Peak, or the holiest mountains to the Hopi, who inhabit these mesas right here. And that's the Sacred Mountain of the West. The Sacred Mountain of the North is the Hesperus area, which incidentally is near Montrose, and they have a lot of very interesting activity over there too on the western slope of Colorado. Now, the yellow words there, you see the Hopi like to be different from the other southwestern tribes. And again, I'm generalizing here. I do get specific in my books about these traditions, but the Hopi feel that they emerged into this current and soon to end Fourth World in the Grand Canyon. Most of your pueblos that are along the Rio Grande here consider this area in the San Luis Valley to be the place of emergence. Now, if we move forward here, this is an example of right by the Sipapu, which is the Diné word for the place of emergence. Now, they believe that they were protected underground during earth changes by ant people in one tradition, and that once it's safe to come back out and go above ground, then they emerge out of the Sipapu, and then they populate the earth. Now, the Sipapu is very near a very strange feature in the valley, and that's Medno Creek. It's the only river in the world that has waves in it. And it's very interesting because it disappears down a hole. Now, if you know anything about the Maya and Shibo Ba and the Wheats Monster in the underworld, they believe that this is a hole in the ground where we go when we die, and where our ancestors go back and forth between the celestial realms and the Shibo Ba in the Mayan tradition. And we have a very interesting correlation in some of the southwestern tribes' traditions. This is a very interesting, these are waves, folks. These are 3-foot waves, and this creek disappears, and this is right next to the Great Sand Dunes. Now, if we move out from the dune field about 5 miles, 6 miles, then we get into the San Luis Lake State Park, and if you go out about 8 miles, you have this big lake here, and then a smaller wetland area, and then this little lake here is called Head Lake, and right next on the north side of Head Lake is Dollar Lake. And I have found that this is one of the places considered to be the actual place of emergence. There's another little brackish pond here that has also been attributed to be the Sipapu. And if you go up a little creek here to the edge of the dune field, which is right about here, you have some of the oldest remains of man in North America. It's called the Cattle Guard site. It's quite famous in archaeology, and we have wonderful Clovis points in conjunction with mastodon bones there. So this area has been populated since before the sand dunes were there, if you can believe it, or around the same period that the sand dunes supposedly formed. Now, 13 Indian tribes peacefully coexisted in the San Luis Valley during the warmer months. If I was dressed in moccasins and lived in a teepee, I would not want to be there in the winter when it's 40 below. It can get down around 30 to 40 below. So during the warmer months, 3 regional groups of Indians overlapped in the San Luis Valley. It's the only area in North America where 3 regional groups of Indians overlapped. The Great Plains Indians, the Great Basin Indians, and the Southwestern Indians all peacefully coexisted during the warmer months in this area. And this is an example of some of the rock art that you can find. This particular rock art is from further north in Colorado. But I find it very intriguing that we have what many people have called alien-type images. This particular image, I think, is very compelling because it matches what the Hopi consider to be one of the cloud forms, or the cloud kachinas, this cloud dancer. So if you look at that stylized kachina doll, and then look at this picture here, you have a very interesting correlation. And we have other forms. These 3 little guys I would not want to meet up with in a dark alley. They're pretty spooky looking with these helmets and these goggles and these antenna-looking devices, things here. Now, of course, I'm not an anthropologist. I'm not an archaeologist. I can't, look at that and say, what the name of the carver was or what he was thinking when he carved it. But these are the types of images that are popularly referred to as alien images when people are trying to investigate the Native American connection to ufology and UFOs. This is a very important glyph. It's sort of off topic, but it's very important to the Hopi. This is an illustration of the time period that we are in right now, which is the end of the Fourth World, and this has a wonderful legend behind it and a story that was told to Naya and I by this wonderful gentleman, Grandfather Martin Gashwiosomo, who was the last traditional living Hopi elder. And I'll tell you, Grandfather Martin says, you guys, you better be making plans for the big one, okay? He's also the holder of the Hopi Fire Clan tablets. His tradition is thousands of years old. The Hopi consider themselves to be the primordial culture in this side of the world. They believe the Maya were Hopi that were sent south and never made it all the way back. They feel that they're related to the shamans in the Altai. So instead of a land bridge with, the Siberians coming over 10,000 years ago, in waves, when the ice flows were ebbing and flowing and the land bridge was there in the Bering Sea, the Hopi say, oh no, they didn't come from over there. They arrived from over here. So they have a tradition, however, that they were going to meet their Fire Clan brothers from the other side of the world. And just to give you an idea of the wonderful place that I live in, this prophecy is also shared by the Tibetan Fire Clan. Has a similar, if not exact, prophecy of meeting their brethren, Fire Clan brethren, from the other side of the world. And a good friend of Naya's and our said, well, let's make prophecy real. So he brought Kusum Lingpa together with Martin Gashwiosomo. And the 2 of them met in 1994 in Crestone, the town that I lived in. Well, here's Crestone. What a wonderful little place. The first day I arrived, there was 155 people there. The second night I was there, half of them showed up at my house for a party. They heard I was a musician, so all of a sudden all these people started driving up my cul-de-sac, and that's how I met some of my very best friends from the Crestone area. If you'll notice, this big old monster mountain right here is Crestone Peak. Challenger Point's right there. These are 2 of the 7 14,000-foot mountains in the valley area. This little place right here is my house. This is where I lived for 7 years. And I must say, many are called to this place, few are chosen. It's pretty tough to live there. Crestone is located in Saguache County, which is the size of, larger than the state of Connecticut. When I arrived, the average income was below $8,000 a year. And I was lucky. I had people mad at me because I got one of the only jobs in the area. And it was the hardest job I ever had in my life, and it was $6 an hour on the books, if you can believe it. So I went through my paces the first 2 or 3 years I was in the valley. Out in from the Crestone area. Crestone is actually the northeastern corner of one of the 5 Baca land grants. There are 5 huge parcels of land that were given the Baca family to repay them for the U.S. appropriating land from Mexico in the 1820s. The Baca Ranch is 300,000 acres. It is the center of much of the activity that I documented. And those of you who have read my book constantly are hearing the Baca Grande and the Baca Ranch mentioned. Well, Crestone is subdivided into 5,000. The land, actually Crestone is a little mining town. The Baca Grande development is right next to it, and there's 5,500 lots that are subdivided there. Well, way out on the Baca Ranch, I'm just going to digress and tell you a really interesting little story here. There's a little ghost town called Liberty. This is a picture from when the miners were there. All the creeks that run down out of the mountains into the valley drain into the largest aquifer in North America. It goes down 15,000 feet, and then possibly even down as far as 30,000 feet. And this whole valley is filled with trillions of gallons of water underneath it, billions of acre feet of water. And Liberty is one of the many creeks that empty into the aquifer, and all those creeks had little mining towns 130, 140 years ago. And Liberty is one of them. And this gentleman, you may have heard of, is the Undersecretary General of the UN, Maurice Strong. I've heard him. He's one of the guys that rule the world, you know. Him and his cadre of trilateralists and Aspen Institute types are supposedly, you know, running the world. Well, Maurice and his wife, back in the late 70s, created a wonderful sanctuary for a lot of the world's great unbroken spiritual traditions. 5 sects of Tibetan Buddhism. We had a Carmelite monastery, a Zen monastery, Shimikais there, Subud. All these wonderful groups from ancient unbroken lineages are all represented in this little tiny town. Well, Maurice wanted to bless this whole project, so he got the head of the Hopi Wolf clan, Thomas Banyaka, who's famous for addressing the UN and spanking the delegates for not paying attention to traditional ways and honoring the earth. So Maurice had Thomas Banyaka and Bill Moyers come out to Liberty and walk the land, and Thomas was going to bless the land. Well, as he began to bless the land, a large bush burst into flames in front of them. And I don't think Bill Moyers has ever been back to the valley, to my knowledge. Here's a picture of him with, is that Steve Ambassador, or is it my imagination? Okay, just checking. Anyway, this is Hannah Strong, Maurice's wife. Hannah is shown here with one of our wonderful architectural features in the Baca Grande, with a various assortment of the monks and sannyasins that live in Crestone, where I live. This is the largest stupa outside of Tibet or India. It's in Crestone. It's very similar to the stupas that are found near Mount Kailash. This is the mountain that the Tibetans circumambulate, prostrating themselves every step of the way around the mountain. I just thought it was an interesting slide, so I put it in there. Here's another interesting thing. It's called the beehives. It features, there's 5 of them. They've been there since the 1870s. Nobody knows who built them. Archaeologists still are scratching their heads. They're perfectly smooth on the inside and only about 3.5 feet high on the inside. And they feature a unique architectural design that the Native Americans supposedly didn't use, and that is a keystone, where you have a rock and you put your door lintels up against the rock to hold the doorway firm and to support the doorway. They've been there since before the pioneers got there, and the guy that has them on his lot has to deal with the tree. Well, I jokingly refer to them as the crystal licking tree huggers. They come and do the medicine wheels and do little ceremonies and stuff on his land, and he's had to learn to deal with it. Let's go into some history real quick. Of course, we all know why the Spanish first arrived in the New World. They had a disease that only one thing could cure, and that was gold. I think the disease was greed, but we won't get into that today. One of the first people, of course, conquistadores, was Coronado. Here he's shown in a painting with the Turk, who led him out into the middle of Kansas to supposedly a city of gold. Well, it turned out to be mud bricks, so they strangled him. The first real incursion into northern New Mexico was Onate, who brought an expedition up there in the early to mid-1600s. And when they arrived up there, they found the Indians ready to be Christianized. They knew about Jesus somehow. They had fashioned crude crosses. And the Spanish were able to establish 22 missions in New Mexico in just under 2 years' time. It was the easiest conquest of any of the new areas that they opened up for Europeans. And, you know, people have wondered, well, why is this? Well, I heard a very intriguing theory that there was a nun in the 1600s who was seen by her sisters in the convent in Agreda, Spain, bilocated. She claimed she was bilocating to the New World. She would meditate surrounded by a blue glow, was even seen levitating off the ground on a number of occasions. And Sister Agreda came back from these hours and hours of trance saying she was over where the conquistadores are, helping them Christianize the Indians. Well, this really didn't sit well with the Grand Inquisitor. He said, yeah, Sister Marie Jesus, you're coming with us. And she was in the middle of her trial for witchcraft when the conquistadores returned, and lo and behold, she was vindicated because they told stories of the Indians talking about this woman dressed in blue who was white-skinned, who was coming on a cloud, a bluish cloud, and telling them about Jesus. And that's according to historians and her book, The Mystical City of God. This is why it was so easy for the Spanish to subjugate the Indians in the Rio Grande River Valley. Well, we've all heard about the Catholic saints that are incorruptible. There are 12 of them, but only one looks like this, and that's Sister Marie Jesus Agreda. 2 complete scientific investigations of her remains have been done. One was done in 1891. The other was done in 1991. This is the only known photograph that I found that has been published of her remains, and this is her 330 some odd years after her death. It was taken by a very resourceful Spanish journalist who it took me 3 months to find him and track down this picture and get his permission to use it. She looks exactly the same as she did when they did the first scientific investigation of her in 1891. The first documented report of unusual aerial phenomenon in the San Luis Valley occurred on the De Anza expedition in 1777. De Anza was the first Mexican or Spanish governor of the New Mexican territory. And when he was chasing Cuerna Verde, or Greenhorn, a Comanche chief who was raiding down into the Taos area and burning crops and you know, killing some of the Spanish settlers, he chased him up into the valley. And I find it very intriguing that for 150 years the Spanish never went north of Taos. They were told that you don't go up there. That's where the skinwalkers are. That's where, you know, Del Norte, you don't go up there. Well, he had to go up to chase Greenhorn. And so as he was traveling up into the center of the valley at that time was a huge maze of marshlands because the water would, you know, rise and fall from the aquifer. And he reports in his diary that they saw these strange lights that were flying around in the mountain peaks, and they heard this strange, constant, irritating, low, rumbling, humming sound coming out of the mountains. Well, nowadays, back in the mid-90s, that hum was dubbed the Taos hum. It has been heard for decades in the area, and it seems to be extending northward. They're hearing it up in the Paonia area, which is in central Colorado now. And so we have our first documented case of unusual aerial phenomenon documented by Europeans in the San Luis Valley. Well, because the Spanish were able to get up into the area and left settlers, It's very interesting, six, seven generations later, what kinds of communities have sprung up and been sustained in these remote valleys, totally cut off pretty much from the outside world, and some very interesting religious beliefs that have been a melding of shamanic traditions, Native American traditions, and Catholicism have emerged and still exist today. One of the most well-known is Los Hermanos de Penitentes, the Brotherhood of Blood, or the Penitent Brothers. These guys are really serious. You think that the Arabs and some of their Ramadan marches and stuff, flogging themselves, is impressive. These guys will scare you, and I've met a couple of them. They're still around. They, one of their things is they march through the barefoot through the desert, and they pick out this prickly pear patches and they walk over them. And this is one of just a number, about a handful of photographs ever taken of a penitente ritual. The gentleman that took this and 2 other shots was spotted by the penitentes, and they tracked him down and shot him and left him for dead. Fortunately, he survived and was able to get the film processed. This particular cross here was getting prepared for one of these gentlemen, probably this one here, to be crucified on. Every Good Friday back then, they used to crucify one of their brothers, and it was an honor. Now, you see these guys flogging themselves. Now, is this a Christian thing, or is there something else going on here? They're still around. They still practice in their maradas, their places of worship, and I have met, like I said, a couple of them. Up in Del Norte, north up into the valley, there's some very special areas. This is one that I'm going to talk about a little later that has a very interesting story with Stephen Greer involved. And but basically, there's some really interesting belief systems that exist up there. One of the more interesting ones that I can relate to you is this is the largest freestanding mountain in North America. It's called San Antonio Peak by the locals. It's San Antonio Peak. It straddles the border between New Mexico and Colorado on the western side of the valley. And the Taos Pueblo Indians believe that the Creator lives in that mountain, and that when he comes out, he doesn't look like a regular human. He's really big, he smells bad, and he's all covered with hair. And I find it very interesting that the only Bigfoot reports, with 1 or 2 exceptions, in Colorado, a place where you'd think the Bigfoot would be living if there are such a thing, all are right from this area right here. And this area to Fox Creek, which is about over here, if I had a larger slide, is where we've had a number of very compelling Bigfoot reports. So one of the things, too, about the Bigfoot in the San Luis Valley is that they've been seen and reported as stalking herds of elk. Now, I always thought Bigfoot was an herbivore that just ate plants and you know, flora, basically. Well, Bigfoot in the San Luis Valley are meat eaters as well, so that's another little twist for you. Here's some tracks that have been photographed. That's a glove. And you can tell this guy either was really big or, man, the NBA could use him. Okay, how would you like to meet up with this guy at a singles bar? Who does your toes? You need a pedicure, pal. This is what the natives in the Southwest refer to. It's a stylized image, of course, of a skinwalker. Skinwalkers are very interesting sorcerers, brujos, brujas. There's various terms in Spanish and in the native tongues to describe them or define them. But one of the things that they're able to do, allegedly, is enter your body and take over all your motor functions with you being perfectly conscious. Make you do things and say things and go places. This is a still from a movie that featured a skinwalker in it, and I think it captures the mood pretty well. The skinwalkers are a very interesting phenomenon, and they also, the brujos and the sorcerers are supposedly able to shapeshift and turn themselves into a variety of animal forms. One of the areas in my 3rd book of the Mysterious Valley trilogy that I'm going to be getting into very deeply is the Native American tradition of sorcery. And the unfortunate offshoot of that in the law enforcement community of ritual occult crime. There's some really hair-raising stories that have been kept out of the public eye that have been divulged to me by local law enforcement, and referring back to years of this type of activity. I won't bore you tonight with the details, but one of the things that I have found is the belief in the southern end of the valley, in the New Mexico portion, which is predominantly Hispanic. There is a belief that these shape-shifting, skin-walking brujos or brujas can turn themselves into animal forms, but if they want to go somewhere in a hurry, they turn themselves into fireballs. And I have had people call up and report witches on the move. So that's an interesting little subcultural twist to descriptions of UFO-type aerial phenomenon. One of the most prevalent reports that I've gotten over the years is La Llorona, the wailing ghost woman who supposedly lost her kids. They were drowned in one of the canals in the middle of the valley, and she, on certain nights, can be heard, this unearthly wailing sound that wafts over the desert there, along the rivers. Now, we're talking about a place that is 170 miles long by 70 miles wide that has a population of less than 70,000 people. If you do the math, that's about one person for every 7 square miles. These folks know all the sounds in their environment. They know what a cougar, a mountain lion scream sounds like. They know what the wind sounds like. They know all the sounds of the animals and of the natural occurring phenomena in the area. So I find it interesting when they call me up and are terrified that La Llorona is back. Go figure. Okay, moving right along. La Llorona may have its roots in Iberian Spain. There's even a Mayan legend of a wailing woman who lost her kids. I won't bore you with the details on that one. This one, though, is really a killer. I call him the Pewaukee Devil. He normally appears around the Pewaukee area in the Espanola Valley exclusively Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, the last days of Lent, the 3 days before Easter. He generally is reported as appearing in a cantina where they're drinking and partying sinfully during Lent. He woos the prettiest girl, and either his hat pops off, he's dressed in a suit, generally, an off-white or pink suit. His hat will pop off and he'll have horns. A tail will pop out of his pants. He's been reported as having goat's feet and hairy feet, cloven hooves. They even had reports in the late, mid to late 90s when the Isleta Pueblo opened up and some of the other pueblos on the Rio Grande, that he was giving people single quarters and they were hitting the jackpot. And when the people would try to thank him and repay him, he'd either have demon eyes. One lady reported finding him out in his car in the parking lot, and he had a red tail laying on the seat next to him. Well, you would think, yeah, okay, newspaper article, slow news day. If that's the case, then why did they close the casino down and have it exercised during the best weekend of the year for making money? So I won't, again, I've really got to zip through this stuff. But this is the one report that I personally investigated, and boy, I believe it. The uncle of the chief of police of Cuesta, New Mexico, was driving late at night on Good Friday night in 1993, was driving home late at 2 in the morning on Highway 522, found a woman walking alongside of the road all dressed in red. She had her shoes in her hand. He stopped to pick her up and ask her why, did she need help? She got in without a word into the front seat of his truck. He looked down at her legs. He's a guy, right? He looked down at her legs, and she had goat legs and cloven feet. As soon as he saw that, she instantly dematerialized from his front seat. This is a non-drinking deacon of his church, pillar of his community. He raced into Cuesta, woke up the dispatcher, insisted that his nephew, the chief of police, be called down to the station house and filed an official report of a demon woman who disappeared from the front seat of his truck after he noticed she had goat's feet. Now, there is an official police report on file, and the chief of police is the one that told me the story. Now, I find it very interesting that right where he picked her up is a ranch called the Tres Ritos Ranch. That weekend, they had the first of a series of 50 cattle mutilations over the next 4.5 years. And they are the first cases in a spate of a whole cycle of cases, and they featured ritual occult sign around the animals. Now, oh, geez, special effects. I just pulled this image off the net. I don't have an actual photograph of the ritual sign. The ranch manager does, and he has an exhaustive log of every case that they experience in the unusual animal death realm. Now, I'm not sure what to make of that, but I do have a feeling there's a connection. We'll get to that hopefully too later if I have time. Another thing that's reported often in the valley are these wonderful lenticular cloud formations. Many of you who go online and visit the Jeff Wren site and other sites might recall 2 years ago, last July, this cool photograph of a lenticular cloud hovering over Cuesta. Well, what wasn't reported on the Wren site was that the people at the Llama Foundation outside of Cuesta were watching UFOs going in and out of the cloud, and occasionally they would see the glimmer of what looked like a huge silver shape being shrouded excuse me, by the cloud. They watched these things go back and forth. They estimated over 400 objects, or at least appeared to be 400 objects, either exiting and leaving the cloud over a space of an afternoon. This is the beginning of the second week of July, 2.5 years ago. One of the things that I've noticed very early on was that when lenticular clouds were around, number one, the people around there think that if there's those clouds, those saucer clouds around, there's going to be UFO sightings. There's an interesting, just knee-jerk, I don't know what to call it, I guess, just a correlation between these clouds and sightings. And I had a really interesting sighting with my brother, who took this picture of a 7-mile-long cloud hovering over the sand dunes here, over the Baca Ranch. We noticed it because it was just a perfect saucer cloud, and Brendan goes, wow, if we take a picture of it, maybe we can like hoax people. And I said, no, Brendan, we're not going to do that, but take a picture of it. So he did. It was just a little box camera that we had, one of those disposable cameras. I couldn't afford to have a good camera at that point. So we get back into the truck, and we're driving along, and about 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes later, we look over and the thing was gone. I mean, a 7-mile cloud, 2 minutes? I don't know. Anyway, moving right along here. Come on. Oh, there we go, saucer cloud. Okay, this is one of my favorite correlations. When the Hispanics in the south end of the valley, again, I'm generalizing, but I've heard this time and time again, when they see a UFO, they hope it hovers. Why? Bink, come on. If a UFO hovers, dig for treasure underneath. Now, I love that one. I have seen a Spanish coin with my own eyes that supposedly was part of a bunch of coins that were found underneath where a UFO hovered. What do you make of that? I don't know. Interesting subcultural beliefs in the San Luis Valley, I suppose. Here's another one. The guy was one of the heads of the Menzies Society in Kansas, lived in Cuesta. He claims, he called me up and said, I wasn't going to tell you this, but I got to. I was abducted. I was taken up into a ship. I looked around, saw this wonderful technology, and the first thing that came into my mind is, I wonder if it can show me where the gold is. Zep! He was shown the 1888 lost robbery hoard. Zip! He was shown an undiscovered vein of gold in what he thinks is Coyote Canyon. Zip! He was shown another Spanish treasure that he didn't know what the name of it was. Zip! He was shown another vein of gold. He has spent the last 5 years on the ground trying to figure out exactly where he was 1,000 feet in the air when he was shown these things. This guy has a photographic memory. He is, he is beyond believable, at least in my mind, now that I've gotten to know him. And he's on track. He thinks he's identified one of these 4 areas and is now getting the treasure rights and trying to buy the land and get the treasure rights to dig there. Believe it or not. And more special effects. Okay. Chris, where are you going with all this stuff? Here's me back when I was several pounds lighter and a lot more wet behind the ears in the shaman's cave. Wonderful little spot. I used to go up there and commune with nature, meditate. This is a digital representation of what it feels like sometimes up there. Well, as I said very early on, I think we need to target our investigative focus. And we need to focus on these wonderful hotspot areas, the San Luis Valley being one of them. We need to identify them, the local areas where these types of continuous waves of activity occur. We need to fully train local investigators. I think the MUFON model for investigation and documentation is a perfect starting point for that. But we need to have triangulation, corroboration, and investigation. Now I'm getting off my soapbox. Okay, this is my attempt to do that. This is a log of unusual events that I have researched and/or investigated in the San Luis Valley. It contains sightings that have the following information and information only. You need to have this stuff to be in this log. The date, the time, the location, the county. I use a valet classification system, the type of report, who investigated it, whether there was media coverage, whether there were other relative sightings to this one, and I put my own subjective highlights in it. If I logged every story that I heard that didn't have a name or a date attached to it, I'd have a stack of paper as tall as this podium. I thought I was off my soapbox. Okay, I have been able, through patient work and cross-referencing reports, looking for patterns, and working my tail off, basically, to identify what I believe are very location-specific places where the veil is thin. Like Stretch and Taffy, holes appear. The San Luis Valley has places like this, and I can take you to an exact location. This gentleman came to Crestone because he heard of my work. He is a member of the Russian Academy of Sciences. He has 40 patents, or 17 patents rather, on monitoring equipment, scientific monitoring gear, including some really wild stuff that he whipped out in this whole big old array of gear that he had, and he said, take me to a spot. Well, I took him to the following spot where this photograph was taken in December '97 at 5 degrees temperature. Look at that. That's me. That's Brian Williams, who's a portal area photographer. His wife took this shot with a digital camera. This is an unretouched photo that I saw 5 seconds after it was taken. The object, when it was first seen by Carol, appeared right between us, and she said, quick, take a shot, and it moved this far by the time she clicked the shutter. This is a close-up. Now, I did boost up the contrast just a hair, just to show you a little bit more detail. But what the heck is that? This is a portal area and they have disco dance parties or something. It's like a disco ball. Tom Dongo, I know very well, who's in Sedona, has some really riveting shots, but I've never seen one with all these different colors in it like that. Maybe there are some shots like that out there, but moving right along, this we could barely make out, but everybody was watching this little guy zipping around. He was like this worm about this long. It was wiggling all around, and it was quite bright. We could see this. This we could just barely make out. I'm asking Carol, why is there a flying martini olive in front of us? And here's a close-up of it. It's like a flying martini olive. The green one had zipped away. This one appeared along with the squiggly thing. And here's a close-up of the squiggly thing. This is it over here. It squiggled up like this and then went over to here, The Martini olive decided to like head towards the mountain, so it was taken off that direction. The Tibetans call these light forms tigles, and they're quite well known in Tibet. And they have a whole litany of information that they've, over the 1,000 years or so, have amassed quite an interesting subcultural belief system around these objects. Folks, these aren't insects out of focus close to the camera, not at 5 degrees. It was cold that night. Here's another one that kind of puzzles me. We have these things that people report that undulate. They're about this long. They're shaped like this. They seem to be kind of opaque in the middle, and they get translucent towards the end. They move like this, about this high off the ground. Animals react to them. People see them. They don't leave any tracks. I've personally seen one. I was looking right at it. Most of the time you see them out of your peripheral vision. But there's a place on the road going into Crestone, right before the first S-turn as you're going out of town, where people constantly are reporting what the Navajo have told me they call prairie dragons. Now that's obviously a contemporary term, but it sounds kind of cool, so I use it. At this corner, we also have reports of a phantom buckboard, of a guy in an old-fashioned buckboard riding it into town. And people come around the corner and they go right through him and freak out because they think they just killed somebody, and then of course they realize, oh my God, I just went right through it. There's also a herd of ghost horses that are seen right on this stretch here. They gallop along the car, alongside the car. People look out and they can see through them. One report had the house that was supposed to be there gone and totally different vegetation and no fence line there. Well, one of my favorite prairie dragon sightings was by a world-famous musician who played keyboards in all the golden age of television shows. Lived here in LA a long time. Was the guy that played the theme on Star Trek, The Untouchables, the Donna Reed Show, did the dee-dee-dee-dee on the Twilight Zone theme, has invented the electronic guitar. His name is Jack Cookley. Wonderful guy. He's in his 70s and still can knock a heavy bag off a hook. He's a karate, black belt in karate. He was driving here, slowing down to go over around the turn, and he claims he ran through 60 of these things that were all crossing the road in a giant group. Well, I stopped. There was a group of people that came down visiting, and they asked me to take them around, the area and show them some sights. So I stopped and was telling them about the prairie dragons. This woman took 5 photographs standing in the same spot. And how come these things down here appeared in one shot and they didn't appear in the other ones? Now, I don't know what it is. I've had an analyst look at it and say it's not a reflection, an over-the-shoulder aberration. If we have any photo analysts in here, I'd love to talk to you about this shot. Anyway, moving right along. I have brought with me some wonderful Mayan art. One of the things that I've been doing the past 2 years is working with Chol Maya carvers down in Guatemala. I have been studying this particular piece, which is very famous in ufology, as Pakal riding a rocket ship. Well, Von Daniken almost got it right. He's not riding a rocket ship. He's falling down the world tree into the Shibo Ba, or the Wheats monster, the underworld. When Von Daniken interpreted this image, we only knew 5% of the language. We now know almost 90%. The only part we don't know is how to pronounce the gods, some of the god forms' names, because they're too long with too many T's, Z's, P's, and L's. I have some wonderful Mayan art over there that's helping pay for my trip. If you are interested in looking at some of it and taking some home, it's very affordable. And one of the things that I've been studying is how to activate the most recent repository of ancient knowledge that we have. This is a Stargate, folks. The original, it was a whole pyramid was built around it. Unfortunately, all 5 of the ones that I had brought with me, I sold the first night down in San Diego, so all of these are gone. But please do see me if you're interested in the Maya. The Maya have a lot of wisdom to share with us, and believe me when I tell you, there are some really interesting times coming up for us in the next 4 or 5 years at maximum. This is a true portal. Now I'll get off my sales pitch. One of the most intriguing areas in the San Luis Valley is the Zapata Falls Grotto. How many people know about the story of Stephen Greer claiming he was surrounded by 12 aliens in a golden light, him and his second-in-command, Sherry Adamak, on a CSETI Ambassador to the Universe training up on Blanca Peak? Anybody hear about that story? Any CSETI members in here? Okay, there were 30 witnesses to it. I've interviewed 18 of them. 12 of them all agree that something indeed did, a light was around Greer and Sherry. Nobody saw aliens that, like Greer claimed. He claimed 12 different alien types surrounded them and told him and Sherry that they were under attack by the government inside the spaceport in Blanca. But this is exactly where it happened, right here. And everybody else was a little further downstream when it occurred. Well, this is a really special place, and this is the one place people say, Chris, I'm coming to the Valley. I want to see something. Where would you tell me to go? Right in the parking lot of where you park to walk up the 1/8 of a mile to this grotto, you will see one of our most common, unusual, unexplained, phenomenal type lighting effects. And if you'll turn around, this is the view that you have down to the sand dunes. Crestone is over here where I lived. Stephen and Sherry were introduced to the Valley very early on in CSETI, and that's where they do their primary trainings. And unfortunately for Stephen, he's been hoaxed by some of the locals. Don't look at me, I wasn't involved. I found out about it later. But they were throwing up helium balloons with LED lights flashing. One guy had an industrial strength laser and was painting trees around them and freaking them out. So, I had one guy last night at the talk down in OC tell me how he was going to hoax people with a radio-controlled blimp or something. But Stephen does have, some things that I disagree with in terms of his approach to ufology. We're going to talk about some of those a little later on, but this is a very special area, and it's not by accident that that's where he trains his ambassadors to the universe. I'm going to go back in history a little bit here now and talk about the most celebrated event in the San Luis Valley in terms of the paranormal or the unknown. In September 1967, we had a wonderful upwelling of cultural change in this country. Timothy Leary had convinced everybody to tune in, turn on and drop out. Well, we had a mass awakening of consciousness, and when I say that, I mean that this is an Alex Gray painting, there were tens of thousands of young people blasting open their consciousness with psychedelics during the Summer of Love, especially in September, the first 2 weeks of September '67. Well, this is when a very unusual event occurred. Now, I don't know if all of you were as much into partying and expanding your consciousnesses as I was when I was younger, but I've always been intrigued why the only life form on the planet that can survive in space, that can blow your consciousness wide open, can only grow in nature in one place. Anybody know where that is? Cow dung. Yep. Dependable psilocybin mushrooms. Well, these are the only pictures of a rear end of a cow I could find online, so I wanted to put together this little montage for you. Yes. What is the only life form on the planet that can survive in space? A mushroom spore. There's another little thing for you. Francis Crick and his idea of transpermia. How come mushrooms are so unlike every other life form on the planet? That's a mycological wonder. Well, during the end of the first week of September 1967, the following event occurred, the Snippy the Horse case. How many people here have heard of Snippy the Horse? Not many. Okay, interesting. This is where I first became aware of the San Luis Valley. The Snippy case occurred in, like I said, on September 8, '67. I was standing in line at 10-year-old at Safeway, and I saw the National Enquirer, the World News, one of those magazines, and it had this picture on the cover. I tell you, I badgered my mother. I said, you have got to give me 10 cents or however much it cost at the time. I have got to get this magazine article. And so I got it, and I held on to it for years, and that's where I first learned about the San Luis Valley. This poor Appaloosa was found missing the flesh, every bit of tissue, all the connective tissue, the hair, all the veins, the meat, the mane, from the withers, from the shoulder, all the way to the tip of its nose. And what most people don't know is the day before, the owner, Nellie Lewis here, her mother was washing the dishes without her glasses on and saw this huge silver shape hover over their corral and lop off the top of a couple of their corral fence posts. Well, the following day, Snippy didn't come in to eat. And I could do a whole lecture just on this one case. It is phenomenal. But what has always really puzzled me is why is Snippy the horse, which no other case has ever occurred that's been like it, why is it considered the first cattle mutilation? Okay? Well, I have a theory. Dr. John Altshuler, does that name ring a bell? He's the hematologist that did hematological and gross pathology lab work on mutilated cattle and found out that many of them are being lased when they are cut up. They're being cut up with the use of lasers. Well, he claims he was in the dune field the night of September 7th, the day before the Snippy case, or the night, rather, of the Snippy case. And when he stumbled out of the dunes, he realized that he had been abducted the night before by these aliens that had these real deep wrinkles in their foreheads. He doesn't remember much about the experience, but he never came back to the valley after that. Well, when he stumbled out of the dune field, he was... he had already talked to the rangers there. They knew about him. They knew that he was a doctor in training, and they had just heard about the Snippy case, and they asked him to go look at it, and he was the mystery pathologist that did the actual on-site pathological, the examination, the post-mortem examination of Snippy the horse. Unfortunately, John was killed on his bike, I think, a couple of years ago. This gentleman in the back was also just recently killed in Manila on the trail of a very interesting story that I will not get into tonight. Anybody interested in buying Snippy? The guy that owned him had him articulated. He was in the chamber, the horse was in the Chamber of Commerce for years, and now the owner of the bones passed away, and the estate wants to sell Snippy. So if you want the ultimate lawn jockey, or, I mean, heck, it'd make a great paperweight, contact me after class, and we'll see if we can get a bid in for you. I don't know how much they want for it, but Snippy's bones are for sale. Now, you see these bones, how white they are? That's what the horse looked like when they found it, and it had been alive less than 10 hours before. There's a lot of elements about the case that I really can't go into right now because we don't have time, but it is absolutely fascinating, this whole scenario, and the incredible uproar that's welled up in the valley after this case. It was an international news story, and what also you don't see in my sighting log, unfortunately, is the hundreds of UFO sightings that were reported from the end of '66 through the end of '69. There was a 3-year period there where amazing hundreds and hundreds of sightings occurred that were documented by the local newspaper reporter Pearl Nicholas. Now, one thing about the Snippy case, it's the first cattle mutilation, okay? Right. Okay, well, what most people don't know is that there were 2 buffalo mutilated on the ranch next door the same weekend as the Snippy case. Now, when I found that out, a light went off over my head, and I'm thinking to myself, well, the Indians stopped really doing their blessings of the Cardinal Mountains. They've been slowly drifting away from their traditional ways. And I find it very interesting that the Snippy case occurred to the 2 animals that are most revered by Native Americans, the horse and the buffalo, or the bison. And Another very interesting fact that most people don't know is the very first outbreak of prion disease in nature, beyond the outbreak of Kuru in New Guinea, the very first outbreak of chronic wasting disease, or mad deer disease, mad elk disease, occurred within days of the Snippy case in Colorado. The first time it was actually detected in nature. I'm going to talk about that a little later in the theorizing portion of my talk. So I have a feeling that this was a sign, this was some sort of warning that was given by some as yet undefined predator that came down and took this horrific action on these animals, starting a wave of possibly over 100,000 of these unusual animal deaths since then. This is the first publicized case. There have been some, in the past. We're going to talk about the animal death thing in detail here a little later, but I just find it very intriguing that the buffalo and the horse were the first targets. Now, I mentioned some of the investigators who have come to the valley. Jim and Coral Lorenzen were the founders of APRO. Probably some of you remember them. I know Ann does. They were one of the early investigators. Leo Sprinkle, who I'm sure many of you are aware of, also came and did some work in the late 60s, early 70s. He regressed the owners of the horse and found out some very amazing information about possible contact experiences. Leo was one of the early investigators. Good old Wendell. I love Wendell, and I can always tell what he had for dinner by looking at his tie. Wendell, unfortunately, really wants to believe. He's like that Fox Mulder poster, I want to believe. Well, unfortunately, I saw a slideshow of Wendell, and one of the pictures was the only intersection in Crestone in the middle of town. And I recognized owners of two of the cars in the picture, and hanging right above them in broad daylight is this huge metallic UFO. And I thought to myself, Wendell, I don't know who the guy is that gave you that shot, but don't believe him. I'm sorry. Wendell was one of the early investigators. This gentleman here, this is the only picture that I have found of him because I had it taken. This is the father of mutology. How would you like to be known as that? I'm the father of mutology. Well, he's the guy that taught me how to research, along with this gentleman who wrote the foreword to both of my books, David Perkins. He was also George W. Bush's roommate at Yale for 2 years. Yeah, good old Izzy. You want to hear some stories? Oh, God, don't get me going. I will tell you one. They're all sitting around in the dorm in '66, and they're all drinking beer in the hallway. It's a group of them. David is a brilliant metaphysician and had a full scholarship to Yale. Was actually his family was not really well off, but all the other guys hanging out in that hallway drinking beer were the sons of the rich and powerful. And one of them looked around and said, "Gosh, you know what, guys? Isn't it amazing? We are so lucky, and maybe one of us is actually going to graduate and grow up to be president of the United States, except for you, George." I could go on, but I won't. Oh, God, Linda, lovely Linda. She taught me how to be a field investigator, and she probably has regretted it ever since. I don't agree with Linda's conclusions 100%, so I have to be careful around her. She starts to yell at me. Linda Howe, I think, has done more than any other single individual to bring public attention to the unusual animal death mystery. And she was also one of the early investigators in the San Luis Valley. Although she did come in, and Burl Lewis, who was one of the first people I talked to when I started out, told me that I should go talk to that TV lady if I wanted to know about the cattle mutilations. Okay, we're going to really zip through the unusual animal death thing. I did give an entire lecture when I was here 8 years ago. Gosh, the time flies, let me tell you. It's great to be back, but I do need to talk about this for one reason only, and that is, it's one thing to have photographs of squiggly lights in the sky or blurry discoidal objects in daylight. If we're lucky, occasionally we get some good video. There are some good films that have been taken, included by Ray Stanford, who I'm going to mention here in a little while. But the one paranormal subject area that leaves behind thousands of pounds of physical evidence is the unusual animal death phenomenon. Now, Linda Howe and others and the media would like to call these cases animal mutilations. Well, I'm sorry, that doesn't wash. These are not mutilations. They are very meticulous, careful experimentations that are going on. And I really do like to shy away from the word mutilation. I feel it is gratuitous, sensationalistic, and scary. And one of the reasons why this realm of investigation does not get the amount of exposure, attention, and funding is because of the very term that is lassoed onto it. I prefer to call these unusual animal deaths. Now, these are the areas that I'm going to cover. I'm not going to go through them. I'll let you read. I trust you all can read. Man's relationship with cattle is ancient. Cattle are the first domesticated form of livestock. We have been in an incestuous relationship with our cattle for over 10,000 years. This is a representation from the famous cave paintings in France at Lascaux. You notice the obvious form. This is a prehistoric form of cattle called the Auroch. The last one died in the 1640s in a zoo in Spain. One thing that I can tell you that's very important is that we have been eating cattle for so long that we have a virtual genetic match with cattle hemoglobin. Humans have a genetic similarity and match to cattle hemoglobin, 99.9 to 7 places. Pigs, I think, are to 4 or 5. I would need to check my notes on the actual figure, but that's pretty close. So the old axiom, you are what you eat. Folks, we are cattle. Cattle are us. This is a very important fact. Animal sacrifice has been going on for thousands of years. It stands to reason that ancient man would sacrifice selected animals that he selected so the gods wouldn't come down and take the ones that they wanted. This is another important fact. Animal sacrifice goes on worldwide every day. I have been told by law enforcement that quasi-military groups are involved in some of the animal mutilations. All the cattle are the primary targets. 95% of unusual animal deaths are cattle, but humans are preferred. Okay? How many thousands of people, tens of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people disappear in this country every year? This is an example of a stylized view, ancient view of the cattle god Hathor in the Egyptian pantheon. This is the human version of it. Notice the celestial globe. This is a representation of athletic prowess in the Minoan culture, which worshipped the cow. They used to run at the cow and vault over its horns. Now, I'd like to see one of our bull riding cowboys try that one. Those clowns barely get away with it. This is an animal sacrifice about ready to take place, although they're probably just cutting its throat for dinner. The debunkers have had their way with this whole supposed mystery. It's Wile E. Coyote, magpies, crows, and other predatory and scavenging animals. Even insects have been fingered as the culprit behind these cases. when the media gets involved and every animal that's out there dead in a pasture is seen by an amateur eye, if you don't know what you're looking at, it does look like a mutilation. I have been sent countless videotapes, photographs of just naturally dead cows that have been scavenged. I have seen magpies carve perfect holes in the rear end of a cow. You could take a compass and draw a perfect circle. So there are cases that are misidentified. Generally, they only occur after the media has become involved in spreading information about real cases. I'm going to try to zip through here. The Kenneth Rommel report was one of the early whitewash attempts by an ex-FBI agent. The results of his of this Operation Animal Mutilation have been thoroughly, the debunker has been debunked, let's put it that way. I will give you a quick story about my first case. When I first got involved in my investigations in the San Luis Valley, honestly, I was just going to write a 500-word article about UFO sightings that half the town saw in November '92. I quickly, in 2 weeks, found out that I had stumbled on a gold mine of information. I knew instantly, within 2 weeks, that I had enough material for several books. And when I started digging, I could write many books on this whole wonderful area of North America. But the first thing that I did was I went to the local sheriff. And I must tell you that I have had a close personal relationship with several county sheriffs in the San Luis Valley, to the point where I almost, at one point in time, I was almost considered an unofficial deputy of weirdness. They were my best source of reports. Oftentimes people, when they see something that they can't explain, the first thing they do is call the sheriff. Well, the sheriff knew that they didn't really want to deal with it, so they gave me the contact information. A lot of these sightings in here are from law enforcement sources. I should have said that early on. Anyway, the first thing I did was call my local sheriff. I said, were there any animal mutilations that occurred in Saguache County? Officially, according to all the researchers, none occurred in the 70s, when over 10,000 cattle were reported mutilated in 32 states in the United States, including over 130 in the San Luis Valley. Saguache County, where I lived, officially had no reports. He said, Chris, I'll look, but we don't even have files on murders back then. You know, there you go. Small county, big county, small time sheriff. Anyway, he found 24 photographs for me. He happened to have some. Told me the names of the deputies that actually investigated the cases. They were old and retired, but they still remembered all the cases. The 24 photographs I was able to match with the ranchers. The first one I matched was this case that was in the town next to mine. I went out there, interviewed the woman. Her name is Virginia Sutherland. She wrote a famous book called The Last Ranch, which is a New York Times bestseller about ranching in the San Luis Valley. She remembered the case vividly, said, yes, I'll go ahead and meet with you. Went out the following day. She told me they were sitting around dinner in the first week of June 1980, and they heard a helicopter fly right over the top of their house. They didn't think anything of it. But then 20 minutes later, as they were finishing dinner, they heard the helicopter coming back. They went outside and saw it rising out of their field, but it was an ancient UH-1 Bell helicopter. Now, what is that type of helicopter in 1980 flying in the San Luis Valley? Especially one that was a mustard yellow color. Now, these helicopters only have a range of 90 miles. And when they went out the following day, I mean, it flew just over their heads. They got a really good look at it. No identifying numbers other than the color and the obvious superstructure of a whirlybird, like in MASH, an early 50s helicopter. Well, they called every airport, every aircraft mechanic, every flight school, anybody that would have any information about this particular type of helicopter, and they were told they were crazy. They couldn't have seen one. Nobody operates them anymore. They're too expensive, and there's no mechanics that can maintain them. Well, they went out into the pasture where the helicopter had landed, and they found their bull mutilated. That's what, pardon the expression, pissed them off enough to make them call all around 2 states to find out where that chopper came from. Well, I went out there and I said, well, Virginia, why don't you take me out to where they found the cow, where you found your cow? She goes, I haven't been out there in years to that part of the pasture. Let's go. Sure enough, there was a skeleton laying on its back, just like in that picture, melted into the desert. And I asked her if I could have the skull. It's on my wall in my office. I painted it. I have a collection of mutilated cow skulls, I guess. I'm weird, I know. Anyway, I'm at home the following day after I interview her, 13 years after the case. I'm sitting with my first cup of coffee in the morning, typing up my notes, and what do I hear? Chung, 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 chung. I look out my window, and it's a UH-1 Yellow Bell helicopter. Flew right over my house. The ancient mariner had an albatross on his neck. I have a tar baby stuck to my face. I kissed the tar baby. That hooked me. Hooked me. Hook, line, and sinker. I'm a changed man. Literally. I've been hell-bent for leather ever since. Did you know that horses can climb trees? This is a 1,300-pound Morgan draft horse found in a tree. Did you know pigs could fly? Mutilated pigs could fly? Especially a javelina, which don't exist in the San Luis Valley, to my knowledge. I've never seen one. This was found 7, 8 feet up in a tree. How about this deer was found in a tree, and the hunters thought that they had a free one. They dragged it out, and they noticed that there was a hole drilled from one tear duct through its septum to the other tear duct, and the whole rear end had been carved out. Still warm. They didn't eat it. Took a picture of it, but unfortunately they dragged it out of the tree. I'd show you the other shot, but it's a little graphic. How about this one? Actually, psych, I got you. This was hit by a train and knocked up on top of that power pole. Seriously. I have had numerous reports of animals found in trees. I have found animals that look like they have been dropped from hundreds of feet in the air. Horns snapped off, all the ribs on the lower side snapped right next to the spine, clean fracture, compound fractures all the way through, animals driven into the ground like they've been dropped from hundreds of feet in the air. Whatever is doing this is coming in from the air. They're not leaving tire tracks, there's no clues. Oftentimes, a combination of the following organs are found missing, in case you don't know what an animal mutilation is. Generally, it's an udder, the rear end, the mandible flesh is removed perfectly, the tongue is gone from deep in the throat. We've had animals found with major organs missing with no break in the hide. We had an animal in Weld County found with its udder perfectly smooth and filled with sand. We've had animals that have had ketamine in them, animals with barbiturates in them, animals that have had fluorescing material splashed on their back, animals with deep bruises like giant claws that come down and grab their backs and lifted them off the ground. I could go on and on and on about some of the things that scientists, law enforcement, and investigators have found on these cases. The media doesn't tell you this stuff. Linda Howe mentions it, but only if it has to do with UFO sightings and aliens. Over 400 helicopter sightings have been associated with mutilation sites. There's a book called The Choppers and the Choppers by Mr. Tom Adams, the father of mutology. Meticulously documented 250 to 300 helicopter sightings. Since then, we've had quite a number more. I'm going to go ahead and zip through here. It's a tough job, folks. Somebody's got to do it. I don't like the smell of cadaverine. That's what makes a dead body stink. I really have an aversion to dead animals, but somebody's got to look into this. I've had big old burly ranchers lean on my shoulder and cry these big alligator tears and ask me, they could have taken any of my herd. Why did they take this one? Why did they take my Bessie? Or why did they take number 444? This is my, I don't know. It's a tough job, but somebody's got to do it. Here's some photographs from the 70s in the San Luis Valley. Notice the bleached mandible. This is highly unusual. John Altshuler has tried to duplicate this effect by boiling the jawbone in a lye solution on his stove. And he can't duplicate this scoured bone look. This one was the freakiest one I investigated. The animal's spine was snapped out in an upwards motion. It was missing its entire spine. The brain was gone, but no break in the cranium. All the organs were gone except the two most loved by scavengers, the heart and the liver. There was not one drop of blood, except for one on the rear left hoof, in a pristine 5-inch field of snow. The animal was dragged inside a heated garage, put on plastic, and would not rot. I've had cases that were still warm. The rancher tried to drag the animal, load it onto a truck, and he pulled it apart because it was already so rotten. There's something very strange going on here, folks. This one was found missing the heart, and look at the hair. First thing I do when I am in the field and somebody reports a case is I look to see if the hair has been cut. Animals don't carry shears or scissors. Humans do. This was the last mutilation reported in San Luis Valley until this recent case that happened in April that I have a picture of coming up. Linda Howe thinks that these animals are being gathered, these parts are being gathered because of the hemoglobin scenario and the match to human hemoglobin, and that either A, these parts are being used as a food source where they lather this protein on their skins and then suck it in through their skins is one theory. Another theory is that they're gathering genetic materials for some sort of unknown reason to possibly hybridize human-alien hybrids. I really have a serious problem with the extraterrestrial hypothesis as it relates to the animal death phenomenon, a very serious problem. There's a lot of pop culture misunderstanding and disinformation out there, folks. Here's a classic example of reverse psychology. I thought the aliens were coming down, killing the cattle and taking the cattle parts. Now what the heck is Sony showing them returning them intact? High 8 brings clarity to this situation. Yeah. If you look at a map of where we process and enrich uranium and plutonium, mine, process, and enrich, put it into weapons, and then you go downstream and downwind of these sites, that's where you're going to find the areas where these cases most often occur. This gentleman, George W. Bush's roommate at Yale, David Perkins, who wrote the foreword to both of my books, was the first one to see the correlation between the use of uranium and the downwind, downstream scenario. You should have him here to talk because he's come up with a theory that ties all paranormal phenomenon together. He calls the evolutionary imperative. This is a very brilliant thinker that deserves a lot more attention and some time behind more podiums. Now, one of the things that I noticed, yeah, and then you get to ask him about W. Oh God, some stories. Now, one thing about the San Luis Valley is that there is no pollution there. It's the only spot in the lower contiguous 48 states that has no air, water, or land pollution. Now, my amateur brain, hearing that, immediately thinks one thing, and that is the San Luis Valley is a control group. There is one source of pollution close to the valley. It's 40 miles away. It's up in the San Juan Mountains, and it's the Somerville Superfund site where they messed up with cyanide leaching for a gold mine. It polluted the top 17 miles of the Alamosa River. In the late 90s, mid to late 90s, the EPA was raising animals on the Alamosa River right here for 90 days to see what? If the pollution from the heavy metals was coming down and getting into the water supply. They found that it was higher up in the river. But you know how they found that out? They took the animals on rented pasture and they took them and mutilated them and did gross tissue analysis. Now, when they came up with the results that were scary, to the scientist who came up with it, he blew the whistle when they tried to cover the results up, and blew the whistle and came out publicly and fingered the EPA as covering up crucial health information from the residents of the San Luis Valley. During the 2-year period the EPA was doing these experiments, guess where all my mutilations were occurring down here? The light bulb, bling. Ted Oliphant was the chief of police in Fife, Alabama. He investigated 100 cases down there. He is convinced that the government is conducting bioweapons experiments in Alabama using cattle as test subjects. He wrote a very good article called "Mad Cows I Have Known." It's on the web. I suggest you read it. What happened in England in 1996? Every head of cattle was slaughtered and burnt because of the rampant spread of transmissible spongiform encephalopathy, known in cows as mad cow disease, known in deer and wild animals as chronic wasting disease, known in humans as Creutzfeldt-Jakob's disease or variant Creutzfeldt-Jakob's disease. Well, prior to 1996, or to 1998 rather, they didn't know what was causing mad cow disease. The Nobel Prize for Medicine was awarded in 1998 to Stanley Prusiner, who was the first one to discover the prion, or the prion. That is the smallest life form yet discovered by man, 1,000 times smaller than the smallest virus. It only is a life form because it can replicate. The other criteria that you can kill it, because if it's alive, you can kill it, is not quite so, because it takes 3,000 degrees to kill a prion. What did they do to all 6 million cattle that they slaughtered in England? They burnt them. But they only used heat up to about 1,200 degrees. Guess where all the prions are? In bone ash that was sold to 70 countries. Ouch. Here's a very graphic picture of one of the slaughter sites. Are these animals worth it? Did you know that if you went to McDonald's and got a hamburger, which I'm sure some of you have been known to do, you stand the chance of possibly having up to 1,000 different animals represented in that one burger? Did you know that? Did you know that the largest source of water pollution on the planet is cows? Did you know that the largest warm-blooded source of methane, which is a ozone-depleting gas, is cattle flatulence? Did you know a cow burps or farts once every minute? Dang. That's a lot of gas, folks. Do you know what the #1 cause of desert forming, desertification is? Cattle. Do you know why they're burning down the lungs of the planet in the rainforest? To make more room for what? Cattle. Do you know if you added up the weight of all the cattle on the planet, they would vastly outweigh humans? Where does anthrax come from? Cattle. You want me to continue? Are these sacred cows, or are they hooved locusts? How come you never hear about sacred cows being mutilated? There's not one case on the record of a Brahman cow being mutilated. Did you know that? So if you go to India, where they have nursing homes for cows, and you have to allow a cow to wander into your house if it wants to, and if you impede its travel, it's a crime. Did you know that? Did you know there's never been a mutilation report in India? Yet in the United States, we know of at least 10,000 official reports. Did you know that cattle are not indigenous to America? Okay, I could really get going on this stuff, folks. How come all the mutilations in the United States stopped cold? The official reports of mutilation stopped cold in 1999. And in 2000, we had the first of over 3,000 cases in South America. Where? Where the world's great cattle herds are. Well, you know what they're up to, folks? They're looking for prion disease, and they're seeing how quickly it's spreading, and these ain't aliens from Zeta Reticuli. Okay, moving right along. This is the most recent case in the San Luis Valley. The government is involved in this, folks, big time. Here's some chopper photographs. Here's a good shot I took in Sedona. I see this big old Jolly Green Giant special ops chopper coming in to land at the airport, snap a picture. Guess what was flying by? Just thought I'd throw that one in there for you. Here's an orb that I photographed in '94 underneath the C-131 cargo plane. Here's a very interesting story. I'm waiting to interview a guy who lives at the base of Blanca. A silver, unpainted cargo plane is flying over the mountain. I get my binoculars out, I'm looking at it, and it disappeared. It flashed and was gone. Not a cloud in the sky. Took about 5 seconds for the sound to stop, but it sounded like somebody turned off the CD. I go to the guy who I was going to interview. I can't believe I just saw that. And he goes, oh, I moved here 3 months ago. I've seen it a bunch of times already. What? Okay, the Indians say there's doorways that open up in the Blanca region. Well, I think the government knows about it, and I think that they know how to activate it and or utilize it. I could go along. I wish I had more time. Okay, here's the Levita Military Operations Area. Wonderful story. The town of Levita, which if you look is Red Wing Gardner. The town of Levita is right here. Had a wonderful sighting of a 150-foot flying wing that was hovering over the Levita golf course. Witnesses went out and they saw it. At first they thought it was a 747 that was going to crash land on the 18th fairway. They realized that it wasn't going to crash land because it was hovering over the water hazard. It extended a beam of light into the water and appeared to be sucking water out of the water hazard. The two little red lights on the tips of the wings decided just before the big object flew away to detach and fly off in different directions. Very interesting that that should happen over the namesake town of the Levita Military Operations Area. 7 witnesses. One of the witnesses asked me if I watched Star Trek, and I said, why? She goes, this thing had a Klingon bird of prey cloaking device, but it was broken. It would flicker in and be there, and then boop, it would go away and then flicker back in. Go figure. Here's an F-16, almost shook me off 4 stages of scaffolding, flew right by me. I could hear the wind ripping off the hull, and if that guy didn't have a helmet on, I could have taken him, picked him out of a lineup. Flying cargo plane. What's wrong with this picture? I thought the Air Force was in the business of flying airplanes. That's the darndest looking airplane I've ever seen. That's a tunnel boring machine, folks. Too bad the camera's rolling. I'm not going to get into some of the information, but I'll leave you with this little gem. I have been hearing stories since '89 when I moved to the San Luis Valley until I left in 2002 of underground bases. First thing I heard about was the alien bases, like the one just over the San Juans in Dulce, which is right over here. Then I heard about the secret base in Crestone that people saw, you know, these trucks that would go and then the ground would sink down, the trucks would disappear, and it was like a fake prairie that was there to hide the fact that there was an elevator there. Then I heard about this underground alien base in Mount Blanca. Then I heard about this base here, which I got some pictures of coming up. Of course, we all know about this one. This is the Cheyenne NORAD facility, 1,500 feet inside Cheyenne Mountain. Then I had a Hollow Earth investigator tell me he was investigating reports of unusual helicopter activity in the Taos, north of Taos in the Rio Grande Gorge, and he watched the doors open up of the side of the canyon, a big concrete pad come out with a helicopter on it. The helicopter fired up its rotor, flew off, pad pulled back in, doors closed. Then I interviewed some deputy sheriff and some other guys that were hunting up here, and they found these big, huge, giant steel doors up on Greeny Mountain. Now this could be some sort of Nike missile base facility as inner perimeter anti-aircraft or anti-ballistic missile ring around NORAD. But interesting, I've had all these reports, and then over the years I've had more and more reports alleging underground type facilities or activity, of course the famous Dulce one, in all these different areas. Well, do you notice anything? Oh, look at that. My goodness, they all line up. And they all go to NORAD. Well, Richard Sauter wrote a book called Underground Tunnels and Bases. I recommend you read it if you're interested in this subject matter. Richard says that there is a nuclear subterranean patent that was awarded in the 70s that could dig from 7 to 30 miles a day. It vitrifies the dirt, creates a thick glass wall around the perimeter inside of the tunnel. Well, let's see, 30 years, 30 miles a day. How many days is that? How many miles is that? We could have a lot of stuff going on underground, folks. Now, the only time, people always ask me, Chris, you ever been, interviewed by the government? They ever done this or that or followed you, broke into your house? No, they haven't, except when I was investigating this subject matter. And with the cameras going, I won't go into details. Very interesting. I should probably reverse and show you what this stuff is over here. This is our most recent anomaly. It's in the Bosque National Wildlife Refuge, just above the border with New Mexico. And we've had a series of unusual earthquakes over there, a mile deep. Nobody knows why they're occurring. There's no reason for Halliburton to be digging over here. One of the top geologists in New Mexico is a good friend of ours and says there's no reason to be digging there. There's no gas, there's no oil, there's no coal. Yet we keep having these earthquakes. When I was preparing this slide, the day I was working on it, the latest one occurred right here, and it was over 4 point on the Richter scale. Well, here's your little, your earthquake monitor site, the EMSC site on the web, and there's the earthquakes. Just below Weston here, there's now these big 4-lane dirt roads down there that never used to be there, and lots of Halliburton trucks. Well, we all know when you say Halliburton, what you're talking about. It's this old guy. Hey, Dickie, how are you? Hey, you ever wonder where this guy is? I think he was a mole in a past life. All his neighbors around the Naval Observatory residence of the Vice President have been complaining about the blasting going on underground. This guy's got some serious issues with the deep. Anyway, without getting too out of line here, I support my president. I don't know about my vice president, though. Okay, Rio Grande Gorge, I told you that one. Tal Levesque, remember that name, Tal? He was the one tramping around in there and saw the helicopter. And here's another one, the Arco plant. I had a great time. A friend of mine broke down in his truck, so I had to bring a trailer over. Well, I always stayed away from here because it's way too spooky to go around. There's another mountain just like this right here out of the picture. But these are 3-story buildings. It's the biggest tax, the tax revenue source in Huerfano County, just over the eastern side of the valley, over the sand dunes area. And then if you go over into the Wet Mountain Valley, in the La Vida military operations area, there's this wonderful facility here that's supposedly a CO2 mining operation. They pull carbon dioxide out of the ground, they pump it through this pipeline, which I've never been able to find, that supposedly goes all the way down to Dalhart, Texas. They use the CO2 to clear out the last oil in a soon-to-dry-up oil well. Well, I wanted to find out what's going on up there, so I had to bring a trailer over to the other side to pick up a friend's broken-down truck, and I went up there. There was no cars. There was no guards or nothing. I walked into the door yelling, "Hello, just need some directions how to find this county road." Had on my jeans, chewing on a hayseed. there was an inch of dust on everything. It looked like a movie set. All these gears and tools and stuff that obviously hadn't been touched in years. Yet that's the biggest tax revenue source in Huerfano County, and all kinds of people work there, but you can never find them. Of course, when I went outside, my brother and my friend were sitting there with their hands up in the air, and all these trucks were around with blinking yellow lights going, "Son, what are you doing here?" I said, "Looking for a way on the county road." "Son, you ain't supposed to be here, so I suggest you get in your little truck, you turn around, and you drive out the way you came." "But I want to go." "Son, did you hear me?" "Yes, sir." This is another interesting site where the Rio Grande Gorge is. There's some really interesting underground stuff going on in the San Luis Valley. I am not going to bore you with any more details. What does the government know about UFOs? Not much more than we do. That's why they're way more confused. Okay. Again, touting my log. It's on that CD over there. Don't forget, both my books, my log, all these wonderful pictures. Only $15. Okay, here's a nice shot. Rancher goes out to check out his cattle to make sure they weren't mutilated this morning. Guess what flies by? There's a nice little close-up of it. Just another blurry picture of UFOs, right? Well, sorry, I went the wrong way. Whoa, what is that? Go away. Thank you. How about that one? This is actually a Xerox copy. I don't have the original. This is called the Lobo light. It's been seen for decades. It's seen in the same spot. It goes up. Sometimes it flies off, but usually it just goes up, hovers for a while, and then goes back down. No, it's not the moon. Ooh, notice the difference? Little plasma action going on there. Yeah, that's a UFO, right? There's actually, if you look closely, there's a crack on this ball right here. Anyway, moving right along. Anybody ever see this Salida footage? Show of hands. 6.5 minutes of the most wonderful daylight footage ever taken in the San Luis Valley area. 70,000 feet in the air, half a mile long. Was the first case ever not debunked by John Turturro, the head video analyst for the U.S. Military Academy. Also passed muster with every other video analyst except for Jeff Sainio. I wonder why. Oh, here's another one. This is a problem in the San Luis Valley. You try to get these things on film, and it's like, you know, there it is. Moving right along. What role does the media play in all this? Well, I'll tell you, in 1992, all of a sudden, all hell seemed to break loose in the San Luis Valley. Why? The X-Files. Everybody saw this wonderful show, and it kind of jazzed them up, and so when they went outside, instead of looking like this, they looked like this. And they started seeing things. Isn't that wonderful? So did I. Although I actually really didn't like the show. I thought it was a very, very crafty form of disinformation. Well, in the 50s, they were evil reptoids, right? They were coming to get us. The earth stood still, and Klaatu, Nariktu, Labumtu, whatever the heck it was. And, oh man, how'd you like to meet up with that guy? And then there's the other side of the coin. Elliot, be good. It's the Benevolent Space Brothers. Well, he better be around Benevolent Space Brothers, because one karate chop and that neck has had it. Okay? George Adamski is probably the first one, you know, one of the first ones, and Daniel Fry in the 50s to come up with this whole theory of Benevolent Space Brothers. He hoaxed shots by painting them with radioactive paint, by the way. And people wonder why he died young, right? Stephen Greer is one of the proponents for the Benevolent Space Brothers. There is no documented example of UFOs ever harming anybody. Oh yeah? Tell it to this woman who got hit by a particle beam weapon from a chupa in the Amazon rainforest. Her and 30 other people were killed by UFOs in the late 70s, early 80s. She died 3 days after this photograph was taken. Something else is going on. She dried out into a husk, and her hair turned gray and it fell out. A complete accounting of these series of events is in the Jacques Vallée book, Confrontations. I suggest you read it. What do we need to do, folks? We need to do hard data monitoring. And We need to take the lead of a wonderful investigator named Ray Stanford. I could do a whole 5, 6, 7-hour lecture just on this gentleman. I have a completed book called And My Dog Sings Chopin, that is the life story in his own words of this wonderful gentleman who has 59 films of UFOs that he has taken since 1956. He is America's least well-known psychic. He is a psychic paleontologist, has discovered 4 distinct species of dinosaurs, more dinosaur tracks than any other person, has the largest private collection of dinosaur tracks, is the only person to have a baby sauropod track, all within walking distance of his house in Maryland. Okay, this guy found the only articulated dinosaur skeleton in the state of Maryland, has named 4 species after 2 of his kids, believe it or not. Ray is an amazing guy. I wish I could get him out here, but he thinks I'm crazy to even travel out here. He's very psychic, I guess. I don't know, is there somebody back there that maybe I should? I'm looking at you. I know you're there. He says, Chris, don't tell him too much, you know. Anyway, Ray's an amazing guy. I'm very pleased to announce that, you ever seen the In Search of show, Leonard Nimoy? You know that opening shot of the UFO in the clouds? Ray Stanford. He has taken 4 movie films of UFOs out airliner windows, including one in 1978 of a grandmother ship with motherships docking underneath it, shooting out little scout ships, including one that came right up to the window, and the magnetic field of the craft optically flattens the horizon. When he releases these films, ufology is going to be different. He is going to be releasing 2 peer-reviewed scientific papers with 2 PhDs, one in plasma physics and the other in optical physics. As soon as the papers are released, he thinks his name will be remembered, and he's going to allow me to release his life story. The Edgar Cayce family called him the next Edgar Cayce. This man is absolutely beyond amazing. I've met a lot of people in my life. Nobody can hold a candle to this man. He was the one that debunked Adamski, George Hunt Williamson, Daniel Fry, George Van Tassel, all those wonderful names from the 50s. You will be hearing about Ray very soon if he continues his work. I met him because, and talked to him and convinced him to get his life story written down because he almost died from a heart attack 2 years ago. Ooh, there he is. And that guy next to him is me. It's very difficult being around someone that can tell you who you've been hanging out with because of the aura, the effect of their aura on your aura. And he sniffs you. Ask Naya. Folks, the aliens, maybe they're here, but the extraterrestrial hypothesis is running roughshod in ufology. Folks, I hate to be raining on your MUFON parade, but they've been here as long, if not longer, than we have. I doubt that they're from another planet. They're probably extra-dimensional. If you know anything about quantum physics, you know about string theory. Hopefully, if you know about string theory, you know about superstring theory. And hopefully, if you know about superstring theory, you know a little bit about M theory or membrane theory. We now know there's 11 dimensions, and I've got an audience in this room that you can't see. This kind of stuff makes me itch in places I do not know where to scratch. Roswell is like a virus. The closer you get, the more the alien images come out. I have seen Western clothing stores with alien mannequins dressed up as cowboys. You've got to draw the line somewhere, people. Please get over it. The wheel is not only broken in ufology, it fell off the car a long time ago. We need to be practicing creative thinking. This guy will not have anything to do with you or I, because we are not opening up our creative thought processes. Okay? I don't buy into everything that Jacques Vallée says. Either does Ray Stanford. But at least he's trying to look at the same old freaking wheel with a new perspective. Okay? Here's an example of some creative thinking. Stop it. Come on, Jacques. Give me a break there, guy. Oh, here we go. Look at that. How would you like to have a haircut like that? Jeez. And didn't your mom tell you about protein powder? God, Jacques. Here's some connections for you. I don't have much time, so I'm going to zip through this real quick. On October 17th, 1997, 13,000 acres of virgin forest on the Continental Divide in Colorado were flattened in less than 5 minutes. If you fly over it, you can see patterning. I have aerial footage that is scarily patterned. 20 miles long by 2 miles wide. They called it a series of macrobursts. Well, a macroburst is a series of microbursts. So it must have been a parliament or a conclave of microbursts that did this. There's videotape of it happening. Now, isn't it interesting that within several days, chronic wasting disease broke out in the deer herds in this area? It has now spread all the way as far as Vermont. Where's that little light bulb? Bing! Well, here's some interesting shots of it. It happened right here, and then chronic wasting disease spread to the east, and it spread, and it spread, and it's all the way to almost to Maine now. This has bothered me, but I'll tell you, it sure jazzed this particular, well, the Rocky Mountain Biophysics Lab, where they probably weaponized Kuru in the 60s, is right in Fort Collins. So maybe there's some sort of connection there. I could get into it, I don't have time. Here's some more tree circles. These happened in the San Luis Valley. These are 100-foot trees, folks. In Colorado, we don't have crop circles, although we did have some in 1970 in the San Luis Valley. We have tree circles. Things are big out west. Okay, here's an 8-foot root ball. Here's what we should be studying, random blowdown events. I talked to this gentleman. I was very fortunate to meet him. And I said, Lawrence, did you know that chronic wasting disease broke out in the deer herds around this blowdown area? And that I had mutilations downstream from blowdown events here in the San Luis Valley? And he said, I want to hear more. I got to spend the entire day with him, and he funded me for 2 years. I have not allowed this knowledge to be public because people will think I work for the guy or that I'm beholden to him. Well, now that he's passed away, I can tell you that he gifted me 2 years with enough money to do my research and write my second book. And he has an absolute fascination, or he had a fascination with crop circles. Why? Because they've always been occurring. Look at this. This is the mowing devil from the 1650s in Herefordshire. Well, one of the things that Lawrence was very intrigued with, and why he wanted to spend an entire day with me, it's not very often you get to spend a whole day with a billionaire. And so I told him, well, Lawrence, you know, it's always bothered me that crop circles have been around for a long time, but they've always been just simple circles, you know, like Doug and Dave style. And isn't it interesting that the first time a new element was introduced to a crop circle was a ring around it, and it happened the same time that mad cow disease broke out in England. Where's that little bing thing again? Bing! Creative thinking, folks. We got to start making connections here. We got to do this not only in the crop circle realm, not only in the animal mutilation realm, but we have to start doing this in the ufological realm as well. Well, I think that the whole crop circle thing is quite enigmatic. Rockefeller's right-hand man says, oh, Chris, come on. Most crop circles are done from space by some sort of plasma weapon platform. He insinuated that. He said they're done from space. Well, why the heck would they do it from space? They couldn't do this. They couldn't weave, 3 feet off the ground, weave these patterns. There's no way. This is a real circle, folks. Oh, there's my bing. Here's another one that's probably hoaxed. Colin Andrews thinks up to 80% of crop circles are probably hoaxed. I've wondered, well, why in England? Why are they so good there? Because they've been doing it longer. They have more practice. Team Satan is amazing. You ever seen the Nissan minivan they did for television in New Zealand? Jeez, they're really good. This is a cool one. Whoa, watch out, it might bite you. Okay, there we go. Are we alone, or is this a closed system, folks? You know, is this a closed system? Are we alone? Or are little aliens coming light years to visit this rock and pick up rocks and look at flowers for the last 50 years like they'd never seen them before? There's something not right about that. Why are they using medieval medical technology that doesn't even rise to the level that we already have now? What's wrong with that picture? There's something else going on. You could stick something the size of this around the planet in orbit and get as much information as you wanted to know about this planet. Why send down big steam engine clanking machines that look like airships in the 1890s and then have the pilots go, you know, do you know what time it is? And then when you tell him the time, he says, you're lying. Why would an alien come down, ask a question, then tell you you're lying when you gave him a truthful answer? You know, there's just something else going on here. And I wish I had more time to really go through a lot of my theories and stuff. But you're just going to have me back out. And maybe the next time we'll just talk about UFOs, or we'll just talk about theories about cattle, or theories about the paranormal, and all these rest of these things. I'm going to do a question and answer session, but I'm not sure how long we're going to be able to get away with staying here. So thank you very much. I really tried to get through the material, and I really appreciate your time.